Well, many subscribers of electricity in Lagos have been complaining about the astronomical nature of the estimated bills from the power distribution companies in the state. The paying public have not been keeping quiet either, with an increasing number calling into metro programs, both on TV and radio, to complain about the bills, which in some places have gone up by as much as 5,000%. Well, exactly what is the problem of Nigeria's power sector? Why has government failed to match its words with action regarding its well-publicized plans to protect the paying public from exploitation by unscrupulous racketeers? It's been the same old story, including estimated billing, poor infrastructure, frequent collapse of the national grid, investors in the power value chain whose interest is improving quality of service can best be described as lukewarm. And joining us now from Arise Abuja studios to have a conversation on this matter is Dr. Sam Amadi, a lawyer, academic, and former chairman, Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC. Welcome to the program, Dr. Amadi.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning, Dr. Amadi. Thank you for joining us. Compliments of the season. Well, quickly, Dr. Amadi.
Same to you.
I'd like to ask you about the national grid. This year, the national grid has collapsed so many times. Every time national grid collapses, resulting in power outages and a lot of discomfort for consumers of electricity. And there are persons who are saying the problem is with the transmission company, and maybe we need to do something about that transmission company. All kinds of excuses are given. How do we ensure that the national grid is stable? And should we just have just one national grid, or there is need for decentralization? What are your thoughts?
Okay, first, let's start with why. Why is because of acute and comprehensive shortage. So first, you have a large country by geography, by all means, and then most of the part of the country, like the northern part of the country, sparsely populated and dispersed. And so that means you're going to have long lines of network. And if those networks are not radial, not looped, it means that transmission losses will be very high. So you have shortage of quality transmission network. Again, you have shortage of the generation, which means you don't have even capacity. We're talking about at maximum 4,000 megawatts potentially available, and sometimes 2,300 or something megawatts that are to be distributed. So you don't have that. Again, you have distribution that is also very safety shortage. So that means that at every time we are on edge, we are just operating at an edge, no redundancy, what we call redundancy, as well as tolerance level, so that if something snaps, quickly get it up. That's number one. Number two is that, of course, we have very poor managerial capability and culture, which means some maintenance is not happening as ought to do, some oversights, people are not on their eyes, are not on the ball, and so if something trips up, perhaps you delay and they cause problems. But again, so these are old problems, and then solving them, actually, we think that a disjunctive approach in terms of reform, okay, privatize this, privatize that, instead of a gradual incremental improvement in the managerial side and investment and basically project management. We've not done that well. Now, back to solution. If you look at it, people say, why don't we privatize the grid? Again, if you privatize the grid like we did the distribution company, where you have scarcity, where you have a market that's almost not existing, then you can be sure who comes to the market. That would be people who have both the managerial and the financial capacity to really make the kind of investment and change management are required to get the grid working. So I think it should be a far shot, to privatize. Now, talk about decentralization. Yes, I think we probably need to be thinking about a regional grid. One outcome of that will be that there will be significant improvement in some grid and great loss in some grid. So, for example, if you have a northern, southern grid or a regional southwest, southeast, northeast, not central grid, you could have competition. You could have improvement in some grid because of how it's located, the availability of generation to distribution and transmission in those areas. Maybe the grid in the south will be stronger. You have the power plants close to the distribution and offtake points. That means there will be less losses, and then there will be improvement. Again, places where have better managerial capability, better governance structure, better code of conduct, we see better grid. But again, the problem is political. we are on a national grid. We distribute, allocate our power based on sharing formula, not based on use, who can take more. If you use and perhaps availability of facility, Lagos zone, Iko and Ikeja will take much of that power than perhaps places like Yola, that's far distant, removed from the source of supply. So primarily, regionalization would improve, like everything in Nigeria restructuring, it will improve local competencies. It may give some gap for some people to catch up, but perhaps that's where to go, because technology in electricity is changing. We're moving from large scale to modular, capacities in terms, whether it's in terms of embedded generation, whether in terms of isolated island distribution network, whether in terms of transmission networks that are now a little bit more like in the European nations, where countries are coming together and converging. You have different grids, but they're converging and creating European power pool. So primarily, I think we need to rethink the grid, but the primary problem is elementary still: managerial capacity, investment, and not just about a budget. How much of those investments go real to dealing with the problem, rather than financing a bureaucracy that is wasteful, incompetent? I look at the leadership structure of the electricity market today, from the minister downwards. Are we getting the right people to fill the position? Is there greater coordination? Are people speaking the same language in terms of competence and managerial acumen? Are you addressing problems as they arise? And at least let's have some incremental improvement before we talk about disruptive change, which in many cases in Nigeria, like a privatization, doesn't work, because you leave the primary thing and then do disruptions. And then disruptions are not coordinated, are not efficient, and they create greater problem for us. So I think utilizing the grid could be a way to rethink the large-scale inefficiency and perhaps begin to mainstream competition among grids, improve some aspect of the grid, while other places may not have power for some time. So, but our national policy has been to communalize uniform mediocrity and not to create, divergence in terms of efficiencies.
Well, Dr. Amadi, despite all of these challenges that you paint, the federal government and players in the power sector are bustling with optimism as regards the Siemens deal. All pun intended. Is there light at the end of the tunnel with the Siemens deal?
I think the Siemens deal should be compared to the NIPP project. I think it's a wise, prudent approach. Instead of waiting for the market, the private sector that doesn't even exist significantly to come and solve the problem, government socializes the risk. So I like the Siemens deal in the sense that, look, the discourse can't radically improve distribution. And it's wrong to assume that tariff will cure that financial crisis. So what the government do, you bring the Siemens deal in a way that you invest in improving distribution, and hopefully distribution gets better, then cost recovery gets better, supply gets better, the propensity to pay gets better. But the problem is this, just like NIPP, project management. NIPP was a great idea. For 2005 to 2010, we would have got 5,000 megawatts or 4,740 megawatts. 2010, 2015, we would have got under 5,000 megawatts, making it 10,000. Now, 10,000 megawatts in the kitty would have been a great deal. But what happened? Up to now, we are still not done with the first phase. So that's what we're going to go with Siemens deal. And the problem is that, look, we are trying to opt out of improving public sector. If we don't reform the public sector, increase project management capacity, policy implementation capacity, you're going to have these private sector deals fall apart. So Siemens is a great deal. It's a good one, I think, at this time. But then you need to look at everything, fit it into the regulatory market, get NEC involved. For example, when it was transacted, NEC was an outlier. It wasn't part of the deal much. So how can you improve a regulated industry without the active involvement of the regulator? Because that means that every cost here has to be recovered, and there must be prudent cost. Now, if you don't have the regulator exercising prudency check, it means that bureaucrats and the businessmen can fit in, irrelevant costs, things that are not important, and then overload the cost at the same time not do the real work. So if you can really put that Siemens deal on a regulated framework and have good project management approach, it will help. It's the kind of things we've seen. Government should get more involved in socializing the risk and not socializing losses for the people and allowing private sector capture the profit. So I'm interested in a quality public sector engagement in the power sector.
Right, Dr. Amadi, I want to talk about cost-reflective tariff, which is a big problem in this sector. I mean, yeah, you argue rightly that, yeah, government has had its hands on some good deals, like the Azura deal, for instance. But those assurances need to come from government, and you know how much government needs to pay every part of the month. So To make up, to create a new power plant will cost about, give or take, in the region of $3 to $5 million US. But a lot of people don't want to churn in that money into this sector because they don't know if they're going to get their money back because of cost-reflective tariff. So more people that are supposed to churn in, into the power sector and create power, they're going to markets like Senegal, where cost-effective tariff is top-notch. They pay according to what they use in Senegal and the likes. How can we bring about that? And I also want to ask you about metering, which has been a big, big issue. The government says give a lot of people meters out there. People don't still have their meters, and you still have things like estimated billing and the likes, which is the thrust of the sector. What do you say about these issues?
Okay, thank you. I'm a believer in cost-reflective tariff, and the idea is very simple, that even if it's government that's providing a private sector, if you're not recovering cost of production, you obviously run out of business, or you have to bring in a windfall to reinvest in the sector. So government needs cost-reflective. Now, see the step we missed. If when we started in 2000, with the National Electric Power Policy, we had focused on corporatizing and commercializing the sector and not privatizing as we did hurriedly. Now, what that means is that you incrementally improve the commercial side of the business, like Egypt has done. Many other African countries are doing well, because what they did was to increase commerciality, ensure that people pay. And as people see they are paying more, they are seeing more resources, more supply, they keep paying. So cost-reflective tariff is important. But the problem is this. In a privatized market where supply is very poor, the incentive to ramp up cost of product is very low, because people see it as a cheat. They see it as exploitation. The private owners have bought these assets and they're not providing the services and they're asking us to pay. So it looks like somebody is exploiting you. In UK, everywhere, people don't like to pay for private sector supplied goods, except it is matched with quality supply. So what we should have done all along is to keep on improving cost-reflective, but then what we call rate shock. It can move from, let's say, 20 naira per kilowatt hour to 40 naira to 50 naira per kilowatt hour when your supply has not increased anyway. Again, transparency. The discos are failing in their duty because they are not able to improve services. They are not engaging their customers in the level of consultation that we wanted. Before I left office, we had what we call the tariff regulation, regulation, which says discos have to consult and convince the customer that this is what level of improvement that is tied to this increase. So it will not be a soft sell. It will be difficult for you to convince people to make that kind of jump in payment of tariff when supply is actually decreasing, whether in terms of volume of power they receive, hours of electricity, or even quality of service, customer care. Whether they make a call, they get answer. Whether you consult them, whether you let them know, whether they can see through what you are going to do in the next 2, 3, 4 years. So we need a lot of communication here to move people to have faith in the sector, and therefore bite that hard bullet, which is take in the short term the high tariff and hope that in the medium to long term, improvement and expansion in capacity will force the tariffs to go down. Right now, both the regulator and the operators lack that kind of confidence, and that's really the first thing to do. I totally agree with you. If you don't fix the tariff, you're not going to fix the sector. But again, this is a problem. In the electricity sector with 20 years kind of recovery path, what happens is that you have to have investors who have the money to invest in the short term. And the regulator gives you assurance that in the long term you get your money back. But here, we have investors who borrowed hot money with short tenure. Therefore, they want tariff to hit the roof now so that they can invest in the now. That's not how it works. That was the error we had. We need people who can invest in the now and recover in the later. That's the only way, so that as improvement happens through investment of your own borrowed capital, then the tariff rises up to catch up with that cost, so that in the medium to long term, you are made good. And then consumers' confidence is high, and then the sector becomes liquid. So our early and unsequenced privatization created a crisis where you have people who have portfolio investors who have no finance to invest in the short term, and who want tariff to hit the roof in the short term when supply is hitting bottom in the short term. That is a perfect storm for failure. Now, back to the metering. I think the same problem. Metering is basically that, look, the discos are not able to finance metering rollout quickly. Now, I have always thought that government, perhaps, instead of giving too much money to the sector, giving bailout to discos necessary, why don't you socialize metering? a public good. Just like today, the COVID stimulus are on. Government is spending to help people out of poverty, out of financial crisis. Spend to provide meter as a public good, and then take it back to the sector over time. Because once everybody is fully metered, or at least 80 to 70% of people, 70 to 80% of the customers are metered, then people can accept very high tariff. Why? Because they have the capacity and incentive to conserve power. They can minimize their own costs by shutting down power, by reducing their consumption of electricity, and then mitigate their own rate shock. But if they are not metered, it's double crisis because they have no way of conservatory behavior. They can't reduce their costs, they can't reduce their consumption. They still get slammed by those outrageous estimated bills. So I think that the way out could be, look, quickly find a way to provide meter, maybe from a public sector perspective, as a form of financial support to the sector, and allow discos themselves to now ramp up supply, because consumers can now pay and control their consumption if they are metered. But if they're not metered, how can they control their consumption and these bills keep going up the roof and power supply gets worse and worse? So I think it's a difficult time for the sector. Metering will not happen that rampantly because the discos themselves don't have the money. Metering is factored in the tariff. They ought to have finance metering by borrowing, and they recover over time. And then we had a CAPME, which was a better, superior plan. The CAPME was simple. It's crowdsourcing financing. Let those who want to pay for meter come up and pay. Then when they pay, you rebate them over 2 years or thereabout with fixed charge reduction. Government cancelled it and brought this new one, which I think will not work, because the superiority of the CAPME was that is consumers themselves metering themselves within a 15 days window, because they control the financing together with the meter installer. So it's an escrow account. The discos have no control over the financing. The money is paid, 15 days you must give me meter, and I paid for the meter, and therefore you rebate me over 2-3 years. So in a short time, you will fill the sector with meter, and then you can now have a condition for tariff that is cost reflective, because people can conserve their consumption and reduce their volumetric impact of the rising tariff.
Well, I mean, Sam, we've been on this metering challenge for quite a while, and there is even a national metering program announced by the federal government, under which the federal government was talking about 6 million meters to be rolled out between 18 and 36 months. And in the last 2 months, some of the discos had public ceremonies saying that, you know, they were launching their own metering program. The CBN also provided a financial framework for the meter access providers. But what is the problem, really, between the discos and the meter access providers? Because if you approach the discos, after all that their ceremonies that they have carried out, they will still tell you that it's not really their responsibility, that there are meter access providers who are supposed to do that. And hence, we still have estimated billing as a major challenge. What exactly, in your view, is the problem? And then I wanted to ask you about the decision by the CBN, you will recall, I think in August, to ring-fence tariff collections by the discos. How helpful has that been, in your view?
Okay, first, let me take the meter one. You know, one of the problems with this sector is policy discontinuity and incoherence. I think it was a mistake that a previous minister of power did by rolling out, by cancelling CAPME and bringing this map. Is not going to work. It has a lot of conflict areas. It takes the bulk of distribution responsibility away from the disco. Discos are concerned about their financing. And so the risk that the so-called private supply map, the meter asset provider, would not have responsibility over billing and collection to an extent is not going to work. So what is suspicion? They warned discos didn't like it, and some of them spoke to me that they preferred CAPME. Well, why? So this is an inferior policy replacement, and that's the mistake we've made. We should cancel it and go back to CAPME. Why is this so? You see, policy needs time to improve. So when we did CAPME, we discovered that there were some discos who were failing to meet the 15 days when people pay meters. Then you have to use enforcement process to cure that deficit. Our problem is that we're always in a hurry to throw away policies that are not working optimally, not knowing that policies have to be optimized. So when you look at a policy, it's not working well, you audit it, then you discover what needs to be tweaked at the margin to make it better, not disruptive, not just remove it and bring another one that is even inferior to that policy. So that map will not work because the discourse will simply say, not our responsibility. And these companies that are certified by NEC, some of them don't even have the financial capacity to invest in metering. You know, the typical Nigerian thing, like when we started our power, generation IPP license, everybody came and took a license, thinking that as a windfall coming from government. So those map people are also the same. They're looking for guarantees, they're looking for credit facility, they're looking for government financing to help them. So you are creating another shallow, bankrupt market. You have the disco market that is bankrupt, shallow. You're creating a meter asset provider market that is bankrupt and shallow. Why not use CAPME, which simply says, look, the discos have two things that help in stopping them from metering. One is financing. Two is willingness, incentive. They like to estimate and make more money. So how do you cure that? First, you crowdsource the financing. Customers bring the money. Two, you take out the incentive of whether to meter or not from them and put it on the meter installer who has incentive to install more, because the more he installs, the more he gets money, and that fund is put in escrow account that the two of them, the disco, the meter asset provider, and the customer. So there is a sense in which you create what you call incentive incompatibility. Nobody's going to cheat. People want it done fast. The installer wants to install more. So he has incentive to install and install and install. With that framework, you now deal with some enforcement failures. That's what we didn't do. We simply changed it and said map, a new name, help some people get certified, and now those people who have those certifications have no market. The discos are not giving them any contract. There's nothing happening. So the metering process is going to be step by step. We can't rush everything. We don't have the market. This market is shallow. We don't have the financing for this sector. So the discos don't have the money. The customers can source or fund them, knowing that they are going to get their meter in 15 days. So our advice, get back to CAPME in the meantime, and then keep pushing the discos to implement their privatization commitment. They agreed on some amount of metering every year, and for 5 years, most of them should have metered all their customers. Well, it's true that new customers are coming in, so the numbers keep increasing. Again,
Dr. Amadi, well, that's all we'll be able to take. Dr. Amadi, thank you very much for joining us this morning.